Well, see, you're well on the way. You're probably pretty close to the top of this ladder of humility, but it never hurts to keep climbing and to try to go a little bit further than we were. But we talked about the first 4 steps, and just let me tell you those. I didn't put them on the paper, but the first one is this awe or fear of the Lord. The second one is not to love your own will. And the third one is to submit yourself in obedience. And the fourth one, very quickly, is then not to give up, but to persevere when this obedience gets hard. So that's putting them kind of concretely and kind of quickly, simply. So then we're ready to begin with the 5th, and we have to go all the way up to 12 today, because winter sets in, and I know we don't have meetings as it gets cold. I found this kind of hard. In the first place, I kept getting them all mixed up. 6, 7, and 8, and I kept saying, but I just said that. Wasn't that the other step? And then I realized, well, that's kind of like climbing a ladder. You know when you're at the beginning, you can tell when you're just starting, and you kind of know when you're at the top and you're looking at the end, but those steps in between kind of tend to get mixed up. So if I get mixed up between 6, 7, and 8, you'll just say that's life. We just, we keep the top and the bottom straight, but in the middle we might get mixed up. Okay, now step 5 says, confess your evil thoughts and deeds. Now this step is about not concealing any of our sinful or wrongful thoughts, but rather to confess them humbly. Benedict says to the abbot, we say to the prioress, Scripture says, make known your way to the Holy One and hope in God. Confess to the Holy One, for goodness and mercy endures forever. And the psalmist says, to you I have acknowledged my offense. My faults have not concealed them. As an oblate, you might say, well, I don't have an abbot. I guess I get out of this step. Not true. But you might ask, to whom shall I confess? Your confessor, your spiritual director, another holy person. But then I thought, well, what about trying to reveal our thoughts, our words, or our deeds to the person that we might have hurt by that? And then I rethought that. I thought, that's way too hard. I'll tell the abbot. It's much easier to tell the abbot I had an evil thought about a sister than it is to tell that sister herself. So I gave that up real quick. I believe that Benedict in this step really is talking about just being who we are. Somebody said that, the truth. No pretense, no cover up. That's hard. The Benedictine heart, says Sister Joan Chittister, most of you are very familiar with her work. She says, a Benedictine heart is a heart that has exposed itself and all its weaknesses, all its pain, all its struggle to someone who has the insight and the care. Father talked about that in his reflection this morning in his homily. We call on others to call us to the heights that we can become. This is the step that calls us to be very transparency. And that transparency is going to bring you peace. I know all the time that I spend trying to keep certain things hidden takes a lot of energy and keeps me from being at peace. I keep hidden how messy my room is. Sign on the door, enter at your own risk. How distracted I am at prayer. I keep that kind of hidden. How Sister Mary Pathanusius gets on my nerves. I don't tell many people that. How many times I went over the speed limit yesterday. All of these things consume a lot of energy for me. And so I really do believe that peace and energy are the fruit of this step of humility. Now take a minute and think of something that you have done or thought and are carefully keeping a secret. Think too of a person that you can or you should or you might reveal it to. And if it seems good to you, you might make a resolution to make that revelation sometime within the next few weeks. And if you can do that, then you can move to step 6. Father talked again about step 6 this morning, being content with the lowest. The Zebedee brothers were not content to be just in Jesus's group. They wanted a high place. But this step says we should be content with the lowest, the most menial treatment. We should regard ourselves as poor and worthless and not very good at whatever task we're given. We should be content with the lowest place at table, and I guess the lowest seat in church. And that probably would be the front bench, since everybody flocks to the last bench, so be humble and walk up to the first. The least favorable task, the dirtiest or the lowest paid job. It's certainly not the dirtiest or the hardest here, but it probably would be dishes. It's just constant here to do the dishes after every meal, and it seems like they multiply in between the meals, and there's more dishes each time. But we could go on and on, but be content with not the best of the tasks or the places. And Benedict says not only to choose the lowest, but to be content with it, even when somebody else chose it for us. Now that seems really hard to me. You remember, there's kind of some false humility, or pride, if I can say, well, I chose the lowest. Look, at least I'd say to myself how good I am. It's different when someone else chooses the lowest for me. Remember the banquet in the Bible when the host had to ask the guests to move? That would have been hard. What? That guest might have said. Doesn't the host know that I deserve, well, maybe I don't deserve the top place, but at least I should be middle ways, and he took me down to the lowest place. Personally, I could probably accept having the lowest place much easier than I could accept having people think I deserved it. So that would be the hard part for me in this seventh step. This step calls us, however, not to just be content with the lowest, but to be content with not maybe the best things, the best treatment. Do you hanker after embossed business cards? You want the very nicest ones? Gilded invitations to important events? Do you like to buy brand names at exclusive stores? Are you proud of your address? I worked in the Joliet Diocese. It was just kind of outside, southwest of Chicago. One of the towns, an exclusive town, I guess they'd want to be called a city, of Naperville. Everybody wanted a Naperville address. And kind of as a story that, yes, people would buy these, they weren't quite mansions, but they were big homes in Naperville so that they could have that. They could say, I come from Naperville. Then the story goes that, well, they didn't have any money left to buy any furniture for it. So if you did get invited to one of these prestigious homes, there was a whole big place of emptiness because they spent all the money on the right address. I don't know, the sisters here are kind of proud of living in a castle and having our address. We have to remember, though, and I think we do, that it was a gift from our sisters from the past, and we love it for that reason. But then this step also says not just the best, But we've kind of gotten into a culture where we have to have the most. We lost the sense of enoughness. We clutch at our money, our degrees, our power, our position. We wear ourselves out looking better than we really are. I think in this step, Benedict is saying, stop climbing. Stop climbing the social ladder and try climbing this ladder of humility. We need to love the life we have and to be grateful for it. Those are two things that just don't go together. If you are ungrateful, you don't have humility. If you're grateful, you have humility. You know, you can't have humility and have the sense of gratitude. You're not grateful if you believe that everything that you possess, you're due that. I worked for it, I deserve it, I got it, it's mine. We believe that we obtained it through our own efforts. That's not gratitude, and it's not humility. They go hand in hand. Step 7 talks about believing oneself to be inferior. We practice this 7th step when we're convinced that we really are lower and of less value than others. Scripture says, insignificant and ignorant, no better than a beast before God. I'm truly a worm, not even human. Uh-oh, we're back to that worms and no man stuff. Now, we talked about this kind of at length last month. I don't know if I can add much, but you may remember that we talked about humility getting mixed up and confused with humiliation. And you remember that this idea of being so down on ourselves kind of came from ancient, maybe the Greeks and the Romans, and they believed that the poor, the outcast, the humble, really were lower class. They were uneducated, they were a servant and slaves, and they just deserved that lot. It was Jesus who first raised humility to a virtue. And while he was very humble, while he could have said the birth, the death, his life was all made up of humble things. So he began to show us that humility, we're not to look down on the humble people, but to recognize that this is a virtue. However, it's not an American or it's not a modern way of thought. And this is where we want to be careful with this, because modern psychology teaches us that thinking so ill of ourselves, instead of not recognizing the truth, this can lead to a very poor self-concept. And then that leads then to a lot of mental problems and difficulties. I think because of the negativity associated with this, a lot of the spiritual writers are suggesting that it is enough to see ourselves as we really are without this pretense we talked about. We need not consider ourselves inferior to everyone in every way. We could simply realize that we are a sinner. We've not always been right, and we don't always have the best idea in the room. We can recognize that there are some people who may be better at something than we are. Maybe we could, I don't know, be like Pope Francis after he was elected Pope, and somebody asked, who are you? How would you describe yourself? And he came without hesitation, it seems, a sinner. In the midst of all the constant accolades that he gets, he remains humble. If you watched any of his visit to the U.S., you saw this humility, and again you saw how it endeared him to the people. We talked a little bit about, well, what was it about Pope Francis that we admired? And people spontaneously said, yes, it's his humility. It was he first started out, his very first action was to ask people to pray for him. A humble person, that's the stance of a humble person. It takes humility to even admit you need prayers, much less to ask it at that particular time. Again, Sister Joan puts it this way. She said, Benedict wanted us to realize that accepting our own smallness, our essential smallness, it frees us from the need to lie, even to ourselves, about our frailties. It liberates us to respect and to revere and to deal very gently with other people whose smallness or faults or weakness may have come to light. Because we're aware of our own meager virtues, then we have a chance to understand and accept the failures and forgive the failures of others. Okay, that's step 7. Step 8 is kind of one of mine. I like it. It says to follow the common rule and the example of the superiors. This can kind of be translated, and is done so, as to be one of the group. For religious, we practice this by living the common life, by being where the other sisters are. You practice this by being in your family, in your group, part of your workplace. We all have norms, we all have examples, we all have groups that we follow and belong to. No one can, nor should they become a law unto themselves. Sister Joan tells us that this step, a way to look at this step, is to stay in the stream of life, to seek out the wisdom in the culture. And that almost brings something that grates on us, to be a part of the culture. We think of, well, we hear about being countercultural. I didn't think I was supposed to be a part of the culture. We have to remember that Benedict was talking, as I think Joan was, a culture of the monastic life, a culture of the spiritual life, not necessarily our modern culture. I don't think that Joan was thinking we should get caught up in much of the modern milieu. I don't imagine that she was thinking about a style that worshiped consumerism or excessive TV or constant use of tech devices or the competitive politics or gun violence. There's an awfully lot, it seems to me, in our culture that we do need to resist. But there's an awfully lot in the stream of life that we need to discern. And we need to think of which stream of life is it that we're going to flow with. I kind of picture us standing on the bank of life, and here it is rushing all around us. There are obstacles, and so it's like the rapids. You just don't know whether to jump in, where. You want to plunge in and flow along, but you also don't want to get carried into lifestyles that won't be Benedictine or won't be helpful for you. We're encouraged to learn from what and who has gone before us. We can learn from the saints. We can learn from the church. We can learn from scriptures and other holy books. We should also respect the experience of the elders among us. I was really impressed last month when I asked you to tell me who are the people that had an influence on you in your life. And many of you mentioned grandparents, parents and grandparents. So I think that you do respect the elders among you. Because if we become a law unto ourselves, then we close our minds and our hearts to the wisdom around us, and we only know then our own naked arrogance. When we're arrogant, that blocks our minds, it cripples our soul, and it makes us unfit for the relationships that would help us grow. This step tells us we don't always have to be the exception, to be different, to stand out in a crowd. The example of our employer, our husband, our wife, our friend might be good. This is the step of a good follower. And the world knows we need good followers. How many times have you heard, or have you even said, what we need around here are some good Indians. We've got too many chiefs. A humble person is a good follower. This step helps us to be willing to learn from our teachers, who enrich us beyond our own merits and help us overcome our limitations. Okay, we've been at this for a little while, and I was just about to suggest that we take a stand-up break and talk among ourselves. But I looked at step 9. It says, be silent. So I guess we'll stand up anyway, because I think we do need to. That we are admonished to control our tongues. We're told to remain silent, not speaking unless we're asked a question. Scripture tells us, in a flood of words, you will not avoid sinning. A talkative person goes aimlessly on earth. I think, from one subject to another is what they meant, goes aimlessly. Here's a description of a talkative person. It says their arrogance erupts in speech. Their opinions become the rule. Their ideas become the goal. Their judgment becomes the norm. Their word becomes the last word, in fact, the only words. Benedict really doesn't believe that there's much room in a monastery for talkative persons. Many of the sisters have said that was one of the things they found hardest when they first came to the community, was how often we kept silence and how long those silences were. But we got used to it, and I think we've got quite a few good sisters who would tell Benedict he's wrong. You can be a talkative sister or monk or oblate and be a good person. However, much of our days, and I'm sure probably much of your day too, is spent in silence. This is because we do quiet work. We do work that needs to have concentration. I suppose this is hard for some of us, but for others of us, it's a great blessing. Many in the community, and I expect in your families and at your workplace, maybe even you, are an introvert. If you are, this is your step. You can stay right here and take advantage of your natural inclination to be silent. If you're an introvert, you already think before you speak. You're usually the last, not the first, to enter the conversation. And for others, the extroverts, those of us who speak right away our mind and kind of get the reputation for speaking a lot, the extroverts will have to work on this step, while we introverts will say, it's easy for me. Again, to quote Sister Joan, wait a minute, but however, whether we're introverts or extroverts, we need to listen, we need to learn, we need to be open to others, because that's what makes it possible for us to be humble and for graced relationships to flourish. Humility is what makes the powerful accessible to the powerless. This is what Sister Joan said. And again, Pope Francis and his almost extreme attention to children, the younger the better, to prisoners, to homeless, to sex abuse victims. He's such a great example of this humility, very accessible, the powerful to the powerless. It's been said that no one is safe from the arrogant or from an arrogant person. And I suppose the inverse of that is true. Everyone is safe in the presence of humility. The 10th step of humility is that we're not given to ready laughter. Did you laugh a while ago? I thought you did. I'm glad you did. Anyway, it's written, only fools raise their voices in laughter. So we're going to have to unpack that a bit and talk about laughter. Just what is Benedict saying to us here? Is he against good humor? Is he against joy? Is he against merrymaking? Or what is he against? Is there no such thing as holy laughter? If so, pretty dreary existence for the humble. A few years ago, there was a kind of a movement to talk about the laughing Jesus. One time I had a picture, I don't anymore, I couldn't dig it up anyplace. But it was a popular image to think of Jesus as laughing. Scripture doesn't tell us that Jesus laughed. We do know that he celebrated. He celebrated at the wedding at Cana. He had dinner with Mary, Martha, and Lazarus. And after they first got over that hurdle of who was going to serve and who was going to just sit and listen, I would imagine they enjoyed the conversation and had a few laughs. We do know that the disciples were accused of feasting instead of fasting. And we know that Jesus was a friend of children. And you well know that anyone who pals around with children laughs a lot. You just have to. So what is it that Benedict is warning us about? Certainly not good humor. Good humor allows us to see life from a fresh and a gracious perspective. It lets us laugh at ourselves, to see the human under the most pompous. Laughter, on the other hand, can be vulgar, it can be crude, it can be cheap, and it can be loud. It may be helpful to look at the kind of laughter Benedict didn't want us to be involved in. Not everything we laugh at is funny. We have almost an innate sense of those things which should provoke laughter. Take just a couple minutes at your table and think of the list of things that you don't think we ought to be laughing at. It won't be hard to come up with a list. Share it with the people at your table. If you can think of anything that you might have laughed at or might be tempted to laugh at, and you really say, that wasn't very funny. Something.
Well, at my company, they're having difficulty ratifying their union contract. And usually what happens is if they have a strike, then this big rat shows up in front, that somebody would cross the line and go to work anyway. But they went to work because they needed to pay their bills. So it becomes a joke, but it isn't really funny. So those kind of things, when people are in trouble.
When people are in trouble. Anything else we thought we... Yes?
We talked about...
The culture. I think cultures, different cultures. The sister brought that up, but I think that's really powerful to be around people of different cultures and different faiths that we don't understand.
Okay, did everybody hear that? That people of different cultures are different faiths, people who are different than we are, and so we laugh at them.
Of the things they do.
The things that they do. Anything else? Yes?
So much canned laughter on television. It's so stupid.
Okay. You've quit watching TV?
Both of the I used to, but the canned laughter is so ridiculous. It's like, I can't take this anymore.
Okay, somebody else, yes.
We were saying political jokes, whether it's President Obama or Donald Trump, or not taking seriously the political situation.
Okay. Okay, here's my list, and you certainly, they touched on those. Ethnic jokes, that would be the culture. Guess that means that the people in Michigan can't make jokes about the Indiana and Ohio people. The people in Indiana can't make jokes about our friends from Louisville and other places.
Does that mean the Kentucky jokes are out too?
I got a sense it does, but it's going to be hard, isn't it? Right. Sexist jokes, and this one, no dumb blonde jokes.
Oh, yeah.
Oh. kind of it's we dumb blondes that tell these jokes. But, okay. Jokes about handicapped or suffering people. There was a song, and I bet, Brenda, you knew that one at one time. It talked about, don't laugh at me. Someday, and it was a handicapped child, someday I'll have wings, so don't laugh at me. I remember that. Suffering people are handicapped people. That's not off-color jokes. I heard on the news, President Obama was asked about Pope Francis and the visit, and he said, well, what do you think of the Pope? And he said, oh, I really love that guy. And he said, we had such a good time together. And he said, we told lots of jokes. And then he added real quickly, they were all clean jokes. That was all the rumor we needed to get out, is that those two were not telling clean jokes. Sneers, or sarcasm, or snide remarks. Shrieking or mindless noises, we might not we oughtn't to think that those are always funny. So those were on my list, as well as the ones that you had. A humble person always avoids using speech or laughter to put down another person. Remember, we said everyone is safe in the presence of a humble person. So everyone should be safe in the humor that you use and tell and repeat. Okay, we're at 11. We got up that ladder kind of quick. The 11th step of humility is that we speak gently, without laughter, that we speak seriously and with becoming modesty. We speak briefly. See, it's almost time. Stop here. Without raising our voices, because the wise are known by their few words. The humble person treads gently, tenderly on life around her. The humble person knows her place in the universe and values the place of other people. Remember, we said earlier that humility sets us in right relationships with God, with the universe, with ourselves, and with others. If we're humble, we value the place of other people. We recognize that we need other people to make up what's lacking in us. We can stand with other people without taking up all the space. There's room for all of us in the life that God planned for us. We don't have to be the dominant person. We don't need to be the center of all conversations or always be the center of attention. We don't have to consume all the time, all the best stuff, all the highest places. There's room for all of us. Joan puts it this way: we're each an ember in the mind of God. We're sent to illumine other people through the dark places and to the sanctuary of truth. The humble person can let God be God. We can do that because we've realized we've let go of the idea that I am God and I have to be God. The Tao teaches us the best people are like water. Bet these flood-ridden places aren't thinking that. But anyway, water benefits all things. It does not compete with them. The best people, like water, settle in low places. They are one with nature. This settling in low places seems to be a good definition for the 11th step of humility. If we are gentle with others, soft in our comments, kind in our hearts, calm in our response, never heckling, never smothering others with noise or derision, then we are a model of Benedictine life. And now we reach the 12th step of humility. And this is the step that says we always manifest humility in our bearing no less than in our hearts. In this step, Benedict is combining the interior and the exterior. And for the humble, this step is a no-brainer. We've talked much about being who we really are, and that's what this step is about. Here, Benedict's not talking about acting in a certain way. If we are humble, it will show. Again, it's like a song that I remember, and if you were a teacher, we used to teach the students, if you're happy and you know it, then your face will surely show it. Remember that? Some of you taught that song. Okay, Benedict might have said, if you're humble and you know it, then your bearing or your stance, your posture will surely show it. Wherever you are, whatever you do, there'll be no appearance of arrogance, simply because there is no arrogance. Benedict is saying that we will be bowed down, but not with poor posture, not with scoliosis. Our humble stance would be because we're humble. We'll recognize our place in the universe. We can truly say that we are sinners, and we can bow our heads and ask for forgiveness. And then because of this wonderful God of mercy, we don't have to stay bowed down. We will be able to hold up our heads. Again, not in arrogance, not in domination, not with the scorn of others, not raising ourselves up so we can push others down, not disdaining others, and not with self-centeredness, but with humility. There's a time, I think the writer of Ecclesiastes might have said, there is a time to bow down and a time to raise up, or rise up. Yes, there's an appropriate stance, and the humble person will instinctively know when and how to show their humility. That's all the steps there are. Aren't you glad there's not any more? Okay, to conclude, I want to again look at Sister Jones' book. You'd think nobody else wrote, but she just writes so well and said just what seemed to be needed to say. Anyway, she said that Benedict's 7th chapter of humility is strangely wonderful and intriguingly distressing. Remember at the beginning I said, my friend said, don't talk on humility. That's so depressing. Well, I guess Joan kind of agreed with them, but let's see what she says about, she says that this chapter could be depressive because it talks about becoming perfect, reaching the summit of humility. Now, if we think being perfect, being perfectly humble means to be flawless, if we think it means we have to earn God, if it thinks we have to be impeccable, this could be depressing. We'll get caught up in those worms again. It can be wonderful, though, if we can be honest about who we are, because then we'll come to know God. We'll recognize the presence of God in our life. We'll recognize that perfection isn't being nitpickingly perfect, but it's maturity, it's rightness, it's wholeness. This chapter of humility is really a human approach to God. It says if we can reach out and meet God where God is. We accept God's will in our life if we can see ourselves and accept ourselves as we really are. If we can live simply, if we can respect and reverence others, and if we can be a trusting part of our world. If we don't have to strut around our world, if we don't have to control it, if we don't have to change our own image to make the world to our image and likeness, then in humility we will have achieved that perfection, that perfect love that casts out fear. And at the end of the chapter 7, the summit of humility, we've reached that then, and we can be so proud of ourselves. Seriously, you've been a wonderful audience. I've enjoyed being with you. No wonder Brenda's always bragging about the Oblates. She isn't a bit humble about you. She's very proud of you. No, she's not humble in that regard, but I love her anyway, and I'm sure you do too. Thanks again.